There is no ethical way to earn money as an environmentalist, and today I wanted to talk about the problem with climate influencers. Now, before we get started on this topic, I want to be clear that this is a direct examination of my work, my praxis to privilege, and focusing on the system more than any individual. The amount of critique within the influencer landscape is valid, but there are also some nuances and things that I've seen in my experience that also need to have active conversations. Is the environmental movement a purity movement that does not allow for mistakes? The creator economy is a class of businesses built by over 50 million independent content creators like myself, curators, and community builders, including social media influencers, bloggers, and videographers. More than 50 million people across the world consider themselves creators, despite the creator economy only being born around a decade ago. And it's become the fastest growing type of small business, and a survey found that American kids want to be a YouTube star and then an astronaut, which is pretty concerning. Now, whether this economy is sustainable long term or not, it has to beg the question that are we still upholding global capitalism as the content creators? The answer is yes, and we all have to uphold capitalism because we need jobs to survive in this world currently. Now, as an environmental educator, I have been labeled as an environmental/climate influencer in this space. And there are some valid critiques that I wanted to talk about, as in my last video it was more about the difficulties being a creator. There was a recent article posted on Teen Vogue that talked about the issues within the climate influencer landscape. After reading this article, I agree with all the points that the authors were making, and thought I'd share with you some of the most interesting points that were discussed. One point that is made about only certain environmental accounts getting selected to become famous on social media is sometimes true. Usually these standards are based on Western standards, they're good at marketing themselves, and are often in global north countries. And these eco-influencers are the ones that have larger following than global south activists and organizers. And this is completely true. If you look closely within the environmental influencer landscape, majority of the ones who have large followings are often white people, but then within BIPOC communities, we can see how colorism, racism plays a role in who is being centered in those conversations. In fact, for myself, marketing myself as queer brown vegan was a strategic marketing tool, as my username is more known than my real name. Now, how do we leverage our platforms and continue to amplify grassroots and global south activists? Well, it's about amplifying their campaign, sharing their links, and ensuring that they are centered in digital media conversations. But this is merely just the beginning, right? This is not the end-all be-all solution. The next point in the article states that eco-influencers use their platforms mainly to share educational content via attention-grabbing videos and infographics, as well to promote sustainable brands. And you can see some of the examples that I've done, right? This is all in their efforts to raise awareness, which they say is essential to actionable steps. However, social media is structured in a way that encourages one's interactions with an issue on awareness alone. It is designed to encourage users to spend hours scrolling through an automated feeds. Users can like a single post from an eco-influencer, feel the gratification of having to take stand against climate change, then move on to watching some other videos that are relevant. Unlike influencers, grassroots activists and organizers advocate directly within communities, forming a genuine bond with residents and their needs. Online and off, they engage in tangible initiatives to divest institutions from fossil fuels and other extractive industries that affect Black and brown neighborhoods, influence local politicians and environmental legislation, and so much more. And this is true, many of us do share and promote ads for products, but this is solely the purpose that there is no funding model for content creators like myself to be able to survive. And for myself specifically, I have made the statement that this supports my work, it funds my team, and supports my family. And I do like some of the product that I use and try to my best to ensure that they don't greenwash. Do I think that it's a solution? No, but I think it can help some consumers to have that money to start reframing their relationship that eventually gets them to redistribute their wealth to communities. And I will say for my work, I have always said that I'm an educator, not an activist, and my work is centered on introductory forums. For many people using social media has actually become one of the largest sectors in which people are learning about climate change, because educational systems in the United States are failing children to teach them these concepts because climate change is seen as a highly controversial topic. Now, I do disagree with the idea of engaging with communities because it depends on that individual. Do they come from a frontline community? Have they been involved in environmental justice work by doing, other examples? And for me, I did language translation in high school. When we say online activism isn't real activism, that can also contribute to erasure of people's work, but I do think there's a power imbalance in how online activism is now being valued higher than offline activism. And I do think that grassroots organizers and orgs have real life data and case studies showcasing how injustices were fought and what was demanded. And this is true where social media is limited in showcasing those stories and solutions. We can talk about the generational statements about fighting for climate justice and getting people involved with their communities, but what are the climate solutions and fights for people to produce? Are they being centered? This is where I understand that this critique comes from. It's not about myself as an individual, but the system. When we uphold the system, we are erasing decades of work, which is why it's important that those who continue to be doing local grassroots activism talk about this in real life examples or at panels and work that had to be done on campaigns to create that change. The other point in the article states the following: influencer culture's focus on individual branding and personally is antithetical to grassroots organizing. It creates a hierarchy within the climate movement, bestowing more clout on those with the largest platforms. And the media fuels this effort by repeatedly highlighting a handful of individuals as the face of the movement, when actually a collective effort, right? Moreover, these faces are rarely from those frontline communities whose voices should be uplifted in the most. And yes, I totally agree with this statement. Influencer culture is an issue, and I want to be clear with you all that I'm a part of that system and a part of that problem. As mentioned in my previous video on the eco challenges as influencers, the creator economy is focused on valuing the community and the commodification of individuals' personalities, which then leads to pedestals of people. And it is completely frustrating that the grassroots activists are not always being centered because they don't have social media platforms. And I want to say that this isn't about being bitter about people not being centered, but the fact that they are grassroots activists and they're not here to chase the accolades, they're here fighting for justice. I do think it is counter to say that influencers are here for the accolades when a lot of us grew from grassroots movements and produced our platforms independently. And we can work to change that narrative to center more people. And I had a recent experience of certain individuals being disappointed and saying that all climate influencers are the problem and that they will not save us. I do see this critique as the system rather than the individual, but I do think we need to peel back some of the layers on the statements, such as I don't think people who are within the movements in digital media are labeling themselves the end-all be-all solutions. But it's easy to find flaws in our work than to see the continued work that we are doing outside. It is impossible to know every injustice happening in the world, but there is an active duty we as people, especially influencers, all hold to ensure that they do not feed into other people's harms under the guise of supporting their careers. What I can't do and I don't stand for is when individuals make binary statements on social media platforms to prove their point, only to attempt to re-traumatize others. The reality is that accountability is not to be held on Instagram comments. It will never be enough, and the fact that people having direct access to our platforms creates a sense of urgency to respond to provide individual accountability. Urgency culture is a form of perfectionism and upholds unsustainable productions of work. Something that I've realized when discussing with individuals is that if they are actually hearing what I'm trying to communicate, I like to do one-on-one calls, not because I want to hide away from people, but to actually be able to understand as an adult what their theory of change is. This isn't to hide information, right? I really want to understand where people are coming from because I think it's really easy for all of us to mischaracterize and misconstrue our words on Instagram discourse comments. And to me, like I always ask, has it come down to a purity ethics movement of that there are zero mistakes to be held because you should know better? And this type of framework is honestly dangerous. And yet again, I want to be understanding that we're coming in from a logical response or an emotional response, because we all know many people within the movement and space have been harmed and carry a lot of personal trauma that end up reflecting how we talk to people in spaces that we may not know. And I've surely seen it in spaces, and I definitely have had it too for myself, but I've had to also check myself if I'm harming the movement based on interrogation. So what happens when you've messed up before? And it is true, I do have a higher responsibility to more to make sure I do research on these platforms, on these brands, and I may be contributing to people's oppression regardless if I know it or not, because global capitalism relies on the oppression of others. And I will be honest with you all, I have messed up, and I want to showcase some of the legal issues that we face. With any typical work, there are contracts to be signed with brands, and those are certain clauses. While we are not able to talk bad about the brand, what I end up doing is having to take a call with the brand. That takes time to speak and to see if I can speak to legal lawyers to help find ways to cancel the contract. What I don't think people realize is that you can't easily take it down an ad when there is a contract and you don't have money to pay for an attorney instantly. The other thing is that if it is unable to be done, are you using the money to redistribute back that wealth to the community that was harmed? While everyone wants to have receipts of what they've done with the money, regardless of what we do, it will always be seen as performative, which is why I know that there are certain people in the movement that are waiting to see you downfall or mess up. And I realize that I don't need to apologize to them, because to give myself that grace and to stand up and to admit and mess up that I fucked up and relearn a new process, that is what matters to me, right? The fact that I'm able to say, you messed up, you need to learn better. But when you make these binary statements and try to shut down people, walk away, say that you're not going to explain anything, and then wanting to have a quote-unquote justice conversation, that is not justice. That is just opening conversations to be open-ended. And the climate influencer landscape is constantly evolving, and for many of us, there are misconceptions that influencers steal money from nonprofits, which isn't true, because we're all LLCs, not 501c3s. We don't qualify for grants as LLCs. But I don't think that people in this movement should be attempting to shut down one another on the basis of a statement that concludes their whole work, right? You can clearly disagree with a person's work and still respect them as a being, because we are imperfect. But I will not stand for people who have been traumatizing the movement to redirect their energy to harm other communities of color like themselves in the group. And this is why I'm concerned about the way people are being treated in this movement. Is it actually accountability, or proving to be pure and true? And I have these videos as a form of accountability on myself to open some dialogue. But what I do fear is that people will often misconstrue my words, because in single Instagram post, a YouTube video, or a TikTok does not encapsulate my true thoughts on the movement. This is where social media is limiting, and I think if we actually gave people more grace and kindness in the movement, we wouldn't be fragmented in these movements. Anyways, I have linked some of these resources that talk about the issues about climate influencers, and want to be clear with anyone who may be new to this community that these conversations are happening. I can't stand for people who say, no one's talking about this issue, therefore climate influencers are not doing anything and I've always known the truth. It's like, no, you clearly have not done the research, you clearly have not looked into these conversations, and also, it doesn't matter the way that we're going to present ourselves, even if we have lists of things that we've done, because that will still be seen as performative. So I hope you all understand that the critiques that come from this industry and how we can have better conversations. And I just want to thank all the writers from Vogue that wrote this wonderful article that brought up more of this conversation. If you love this video about the problem with climate influencers, let me know in the comments what you think, but please give me a like, comment, and subscribe if you want to learn more information.